As promised, today I'm going to be making a video of On the Road, written by Jack Kerouac. I'm going to be talking about my reaction to the first time that I read On the Road, and I'm going to be talking about the last time. What was my reaction when I read On the Road not too long ago? And then in conclusion, I'm going to give you my general thoughts about Jack Kerouac as a writer. Okay? It's not going to be very informative. It's going to be all my opinions, but there you go. It's called Grant Loves Books, right? Now, I've chosen this cover because this was the one that I read. I'm wondering if there is anyone else out there who is not certain as to which one of these two characters is Jack Kerouac. I suppose we assume the other one is Neal Cassady, but I'm not even sure about that. Might be two hobos. But I think one of them is Jack Kerouac and one of them is Neal Cassady, and I don't know which one is which. I think, like my suspicions are, that Jack Kerouac is the one that's leaning over, because the other guy's more handsome and confident, the way that Neal Cassady was said to be. And Jack Kerouac looks a bit feckless, perhaps even a bit insincere. You know, just that pose, that bent over pose. He looks like the kind of man who has a very hard time maintaining an erection, wouldn't you say? You know, because of the alcohol. He was a bad alcoholic. Alcohol makes it hard to, stand up. The first time that I read On the Road, I was a 19-year-old university student. I was living in Ottawa with a roommate who was best left unmentioned. Fucking criminal. I was there and I was reading James Joyce, and I was reading Tom Stoppard, and I was reading Harold Pinter. I was reading the deep intellectual stuff, so I thought. I got On the Road, and it was like an explosion. Shook up my life because it was so infused with all this energy and all this, sort of a new identity that I wasn't familiar with. Like, I listened to a lot of hippie music when I was a teenager. I was really big into the whole Pink Floyd and the Doors and the Beatles and, the hippie stuff. But Kerouac and his generation was one step before the hippies, and this was something quite new to me. Well, the whole movement, which became known as the beatnik movement and generation, it was like opening a door to this rich cultural experience that hitherto you had no knowledge of. All of us, just open the door and it's like, wow, jazz, cars, hitchhiking, crazy friends, this freedom of movement, which seems to have never been, just never captured in that way, that beautiful American way in the 1950s. Like, wow, my plan was to hitchhike from New York City to Denver, and then from Denver to San Francisco. Like, god damn, really? And literature has an impact on my life. Perhaps because I'm older, I don't feel it as strongly as I used to do when I was a young man. And I'm not so overtaken with books the way that I once was. But when I was 19, I read On the Road, and on Friday, after my last class, instead of going home, I decided to go to the bus station and get on a bus from Ottawa to Toronto. It's a 5.5-hour bus ride. And I was going to go to Toronto, and I was going to surprise a girl that I had dated in high school. I was going to show up at her university dormitory and knock on her door and say, I'm here. That was my plan and my goal for the weekend, that I wanted to get on the road. Went to Toronto, went to the liquor store. I think I bought, like one of those big double bottles of red wine, like the 1.5 liters. And I think I bought maybe like a little whiskey. I went to the door. Like I had to get into the reception. When I went to the receptionist, I said, I'm here to meet Laura. And Laura had to be called and come down. I guess they said, there's some maniac here who wants to talk to you. And she's like, Grant, what are you doing? I said, I'm here. I came to talk to you. I want to talk to you all weekend. I was vibrating with energy and hyperactivity. I was on fire, really. I was just like shaking, and so much so that it was disturbing other people. Like, I knew that I was creating this aura of disturbance all around me, but it was fine because, it was inspired by On the Road. I was going to be a catalyst for new philosophical development in the vicinity. Anybody who just came near me, I was going to reach out and touch them and expand their minds. But it didn't quite happen that way. She said, she told me that she had a group project that she needed to work on, and she wasn't going to be able to spend any time with me at the weekend, but I could stay in her dormitory for 2 nights if I had to, if I had nowhere else to go. But she wouldn't be able to give me any of her time. Later, afterwards, she told me that I was obviously out of my mind, and that even just speaking to me for less than 5 minutes gave her a headache, because it was just like I was somebody who has taken a drug that makes you go really fast and really talking, and just like one of those hyperactive crazy people, but with no drugs. Just I'm full of the spirit that I've never encountered before, and I want to share it with everybody and everything and everyone around me. I want to share this Jack Kerouac on the road experience that I've just discovered, and I have to spread the word as quickly and as energetically as I might be able to. Yeah, and so I was really persona non grata that weekend. The sad thing about that is that I actually also, because even though she had to run off for a group project, that didn't dampen my spirits at all. And I roamed about Toronto like a maniac for 48 hours. And I even got a tattoo, which has been one of the big regrets of my life because it's so ugly. I just went into a tattoo place and I looked around and I couldn't find anything. I'm trying to find something that, on the road, maybe connection. And after sort of browsing for over an hour, the tattoo guys were like, "Man, are you going to choose something or what?" So I said, "All right, give me that." They said, "Where do you want it?" And I said, "Well, I'll put it on my chest." And they said, "Are you sure about this?" I said, Yeah. I want a tattoo, guys. Do it. Yeah, I've been saddled with an extremely ugly tattoo because of that goddamn On the Road novel. I think it was about a decade ago that they were going to make a film version of On the Road, and it was going to be starring that actress who was from the Teenage Vampire Werewolf series. And I thought, oh, that's strange, because in my reading of On the Road, the female characters were not very prominent. Odd that they would choose such a well-known actress to be in a film where there does not seem to be any strong female characters of any sort. It's mainly the main character, Jack Kerouac, who takes the name Sal Paradise, and his friend, Neil Cassidy, who takes the name Dean Moriarty, and their exploits hitchhiking. Dean Moriarty does flirt and have sex with a lot of girls in that, and the main character, Sal Paradise, is always looking on enviously, wishing that he was such a ladies' man and his friend, but he knows, that his friend is, some sort of a behemoth of nature, and that he could never hope to come up to his standards. So he just lets his friend run around getting all the girls while he just sits there regretting being moody about it. But that's it for female characters. Dean Moriarty is married to one, and then he's out secretly running around sleeping with another one, all while juggling 2 or 3 jobs or stealing cars or just whatever stupid stuff is happening On the Road. Anyway, I found out that this film version would be coming out shortly, and I thought, well, maybe I'll read the book again to refresh my memory, because this was when I was living in Budapest, and a lot of my English ESL students were asking me, did I know anything about On the Road? And I said, yeah, of course I know plenty. So we talked about it quite a bit, and I explained the cultural movement and the significance and the characters and why, and how it made such a drastic impression on me when I was 19. A lot of my students were very excited to go to see the film, and I really tried to encourage them to read the book before they went to see the movie, because just the idea of a female lead character, that's quite divergent from the actual novel. So I read the book again. Well, needless to say, it didn't have the same impression on me. I didn't jump on a bus and travel from Budapest to Debrecen, or what's a funny name? Hód Mezővásárhely. In fact, I found the book to be a little bit maddening, because, initially when I read the book, I found the Dean Moriarty character, he was some special creature that doesn't come along very often, and maybe you meet some guy like this once in a lifetime. But then I found him to be very tiresome and very immature, running around, sleeping with all the girls you can sleep with while married, while you have kids. You have to settle down. That's in life, yes, we're young and we're wild for a time, but then the settling down period comes about. That is not a bad thing, to calm it down. And we shouldn't go running wild like 17-year-olds. So the second time I read the book in the, I think it was 2012 or 2011, it just struck me in quite a different way. As an older person, I don't mean like as someone reading it in their 40s. Yeah, it's good, and I can see that it is exciting, and I understand that it is to hitchhike all the way across America because you think you're going to have this great experience with this legendary friend, and then you get there and you find that he's got a job and he's got no time to spend with you, and now you're sort of stuck there in San Francisco twiddling your thumbs wondering what you're going to do, thinking, well, I came all the way out here, should I just hitchhike all the way back, or should I get some kind of a job? And you think, well, what was the point of that then? I did feel the second time I read it that it is a wonderful book for young people to read. Somewhere there must be a cutoff age, somewhere 26, 27, 28. Eventually you come to a stage in your life where the actions of the characters and on the road, it's not as much fun. Perhaps you can't empathize anymore with this wild young person, crazy energy. It's hard to, maybe it's just hard to imagine wanting to do it. Whereas when I was a 19-year-old, I thought, yes, that I'm going to live like this. And finally, my thoughts on Jack Kerouac as a writer. I should admit, I have only ever read On the Road, and I think I've read a little bit of Jack Kerouac's beatnik poetry, a very, very small amount of it. And even though it was quite a long time ago, I think the reason I read such a small amount of it was because I absolutely did not enjoy it. So that I read a bit of it and I thought, oh, that's how he writes poetry, is it? I think I tried to read Dr. Sachs, but just it didn't mean anything to me. So I've only ever read On the Road, and I do think it is wonderful that it kickstarted this massive cultural revolution, which became known as the beatnik generation, even though Kerouac himself tried to distance himself from that label and that tribe. There's no denying that he was the fountainhead of all of these artists that were associated with him afterwards, Allen Ginsberg and William S. Burroughs, and even, even to a degree, Charles Bukowski and Paul Bowles, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, all the beatniks and all the other ones who were lumped in there. I have a very special place in my heart for the beatnik generation because I thought they were a lot more sincere and intellectual than the hippie generation. The hippie generation, the peace, love, marijuana, seems a bit childish to me. Admittedly, I still feel that the music was better for the hippie generation, and the beatnik generation, I've never really been able to get the feeling for jazz. When it comes to music, I'll choose the hippies, but as far as art and culture and novels and writing, I'll choose the beatniks. But I have a friend here in Canada, and he is a really 100% Jack Kerouac disciple. Like this guy, you see the bookcase back there? He has like one whole shelf of his bookcase is an altar for Kerouac, and he's got all the bootleg, weird, small press editions of everything he ever wrote. He's got little action figures, and he's got the big head Jack Kerouac. Like he will easily tell you that Jack Kerouac is his favorite writer, and Jack Kerouac's the best, and he is the most culturally influential, and he'll just he's a disciple, and you can't argue with people like that because they're just too single-minded. My feeling about Kerouac is that On the Road is a great book, especially for younger people. However, I don't think it is a book that you read that book and you feel that you are finished with literature. That's not a good way of putting it. That while reading On the Road is very important, and it is a very critical book to read from the 20th century, it's not as significant and not as important as other literature, which doesn't get the same cultural recognition. Like, for instance, only recently I've discovered Primo Levi. Primo Levi's literature is much more culturally significant than Jack Kerouac's literature is. I just feel that there are some people who discover a writer that they love and admire, and they sort of put their foot down and say, okay, I've discovered my favorite writer, So there's no need for me to continue expanding outwards. The people who love Charles Bukowski, they discover Charles Bukowski and they read Charles Bukowski and they feel that nothing else is worth reading because Bukowski was the last word. He was the final writer, the final poet. There's no sense reading anything else because when you've discovered Bukowski, you've discovered the end of literature. That is a very stupid, short-sighted perspective to have. And I feel that with Kerouac and On the Road, there are those people as well. You know, like, nothing comes up to the wild freedom of On the Road. Well, yeah, sure, of course, there's plenty of other books. And it's just that there are some writers where people become like devoted slaves to everything they ever wrote. The lovers of J.D. Salinger, the lovers of Thomas Pynchon, you know, that army of Pynchon lovers. There are people who love Jane Austen. And with Kerouac, it's the same. There's that little Kerouac tribe. You don't want to tell them that On the Road is, well, it's okay, but it's had its day. A relic of a bygone era, really. As good as it was and as groundbreaking as it was, it's still just a book from the mid part of the 20th century. And while it did push the culture forward, plenty has come afterward to throw it in the background. Yeah. To end the video, there's two things I want to mention. One of them is there's a scene in the book that I really want to talk about because the first time I read it when I was 19, I didn't notice it, but the second time I read it when I was in my 40s, I really noticed it. That there's a scene where they drive down to Mexico and I think there is a jukebox and the jukebox is set to like full volume and they put in some money and they put on some music and the volume of the music is so loud that they're just blown away by it. It's very vague in my memory right now, but I think the main character says something like, you know, we had never heard such loud music before. And that stuck in my mind because I realized when they were driving around in the 1950s, you know, maybe the car had like a small radio, but they didn't have these massive disturbing speakers that they have nowadays that you blast your music and you can upset people for several blocks. You know, they had a little radio and if they were driving fast with these big, huge American motors, probably they couldn't even hear it because, you know, just the engine was so loud, right? Like if you really wanted to hear loud music in the 1940s or 1950s, you had to go to a concert and probably a big concert with lots of instruments so that they could really, really make a big noise. It wasn't like today where we can go to see some concert and everybody has the big speakers to make a huge noise. So that stuck in my mind because I realized that, wow, yeah, in the 1950s, you wouldn't have had the opportunity like we do today to really blast your music at insane levels that, you know, now is very popular. The other thing I would like to finish the video on a bit of a sour note. I recall the first time I read On the Road, there is a quotation by Truman Capote. And when I heard this quotation, I said, oh, that Truman Capote must be an asshole. And then the second time I read On the Road, I thought, yeah, that Truman Capote quote is really quite accurate. Truman Capote said about On the Road, he said, that is not writing, that is typing. I see that. I see it. Anyway, so I'll apologize to my friend Warren. Honestly, like on Facebook, when it's Jack Kerouac's birthday, he's posting all of his really obscure memorabilia. Well, that's what he loves. I don't want to take it away from him. I'm just saying that, you know, while you were spending all that time reading all of Kerouac's secondary material, like you could have been reading something a bit better than that. I'm just saying. Personally, my feelings about loving literature are that you need to love it broadly. There's just so much to love. I don't think it's such a wise idea to get too hung up on any one author. Thank you very much for watching. Today I was talking about On the Road by Jack Kerouac. That was number 55 on the list. Go to Patreon, give me a little money, please, please. Or at least subscribe and click, subscribe and click and share with your friends. Say there's this guy, he's talking shit about Kerouac. We're gonna go over there, we're gonna mess him up. Yeah, I'll beat you up. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Grant Shupway. Take care.